Hello, my name is Eric. I have been a software developer for a long time, my whole career, and for the last several years as an Angular developer. So this video is going to be a bit of live coding for anyone interested in seeing an experienced Angular developer and sort of how that process goes. Um, Today I've got one of my open source apps. It's called Weather Graph. Um, And yeah, it's just a little weather app. It hits some endpoints to get some forecasts from third parties and displays them in a nice graph. And this is how I like to consume my weather. Um, and it has a bug. So uh, if we get this into sort of a device mode and we go to a city name that's very long, like this place in Wales, which has the longest name of any city in the world, I hear. This is the short version of it. The long version is 30 something characters long, 50, no, 50 something characters long. Um, but you can see that it has made the app scroll horizontally, which is not what we want. I'd like this to have an ellipsis be cut short so that the same, the icons and the right hand axis are visible at all times, like you would expect, like this. Um, as we make it narrower, it should continue to get narrower here. So I expect this to be a very simple fix with probably just a little bit of CSS. Um, we'll see, live coding. Uh, but then I also want to test to verify it. And so that's probably going to be the interesting part of this video, is seeing how I set up my tests, which is going to be a bit different than the community standards, but have found works well for me and works well for my team. I work on a team of roughly 5 engineers on a product that we've been developing for the last 5 or 6 years in one code base and maintaining it. And so tests are very important to us. That the stuff we wrote 4 years ago doesn't break when we release a new feature this year. Um, so let's dig in. I think the first step, since I think it's just going to be CSS, um, will be to let's see. Let's get it broken first of all. Why isn't it broken? Device mode. Oh, I remember this. If I refresh it while it's already in device mode, no. If I switch the city name while it's already in device mode, there. Okay. Don't quite know why the developer tools are acting like that, but anyway, I'll deal with it. Um, I expect that if we put some sort of overflow rule on this guy here and allow it to, let's see, we're on flex, so maybe give it a minimum flex width of 0. I'm stronger in CSS grid than flex, so I might have to look up exactly how to let that collapse down. And then there's a CSS rule for the text overflow ellipsis. Okay, so I already have that. It's just not being activated. So we've got flex grow and flex shrink. And I don't remember what that does off the top of my head, so let's look that up. Flex shrink. MDN, or developer Mozilla, this is the place to go when you can. It's got, I find, the nicest documentation. It's in a nice sort of reference format. You can, it's not paragraphs that you have to wade through, but yet they still do a good job of having nice, short paragraphs for each thing to understand. It's the right mix of technical level and explanation. All right, so flex shrink, what are you doing? Shrink 0. Ah, okay, there we go. Got an interactive demo. So if it doesn't shrink, it's wide. If it shrinks, it shares the same width as everything else. And now it's half the width of everything else. Okay. Okay. So maybe the other elements here, like this button. No, flex shrink 0. What's this? 0, 0, 0. Why are you not shrinking the way I want? Like I said, if this was CSS grid, I would I'd put a min-max on the width of this column and we'd be all set. But I'm using Angular Material, and Angular Material is the one that's defining this as having a flex layout. This matte toolbar is not my component, or I didn't put that CSS rule on it, I should say. So here's the code. I will show you what I mean. Here's my matte toolbar. And let's find the CSS, which is here. I didn't put the flex, display flex on there. I guess I could make a div inside here of my own. I don't want to try to override the layout of the matte toolbar. That's provided by Angular Material from their library, and I don't want to be in the business of overriding their anything unless they have a well-documented API for that. Because maybe in the future they're going to end up putting another div in between there. They might make their own div in between the matte toolbar and my content that's projected in. And then if I override the display of this particular component, that doesn't work anymore. So I only want to deal with the public API of the library components I use. So I could put my own div inside here and give that a grid layout, and then I would know how to control it myself quite nicely. Let's see, I'd be about like that. But maybe I'll take this as an opportunity to get a little bit better at flex layout. So this quick fix already, because we're live coding, is not quite as quick as I was hoping. All right. So it looks like if I could manage to make this toolbar have a fixed width, it would shrink the right thing. So let's say the width is, let's see, it's currently 480 something. So let's make it 300 pixels. And yes, it is putting the ellipsis right where it should. So it's not a matter of the relative weightings of the things or the ellipsis. That's all set up for me already, or I set it up for myself already. But somehow the width of the toolbar itself it's being allowed to extend wider than its parent component. So here's its parent component. So what if we just say the width is 100%? Nope, that doesn't help us. Somehow these kind of layout things become the bane of my existence. I find myself fiddling with layouts that I want to make full height or full width is normally easier. Full height is especially troublesome, and CSS grid and I don't know, other things don't always work the same between like Chrome on Windows like I am here versus Safari on iOS. Even Chrome on iOS, I've found that what looks right here ends up being something other than the fixed full height that I tell it to be. So why is this too wide? What's allowing it? Even if I set width, let's say max width, 100%, 100%. Aha! So the toolbar has that width. Good. Turn this off. How is the width of, so now something else is setting app root is 320. That's exactly what it should be. if I say 100% of what I assumed would be 320, we end up with 438.25 pixels. And just to make sure, let's see what min width does for us. Aha! If we set a min width, we probably don't even need that anymore. Somehow the min width of this guy defaults to auto. And I'm not too great at these things, but this looks like the secret sauce for what I care about now. Do I want to dig in deeper and really understand this better, or condemn myself to a lifetime of always fiddling like this instead of just actually understanding and knowing what to do? I think for now I kind of just feel like moving on. So this doesn't feel hacky. It feels like, for some reason that I don't understand, the min width is auto, and I want it to be 0 so that it can shrink down as much as it wants to and put the ellipsis there when it does. Yeah, cool. So I'm going to say the mat toolbar min width is 0. And this should auto refresh, and voila. I don't have my custom overridden styles here anymore, and it's looking good. Okay. Now, some people like to do test-driven development, and so they would have gone and written the test first, saw that it failed, and then come back here to play around like I did, and then see the test pass. That would be the ideal red-green refactor kind of scenario. I personally like to know exactly where the code is going to go that implements the fix, because I want to put the test next to the file where I put the code to fix it. And so I like to find the fix first. Then I'm going to comment it out. Now I can go write a failing test, then come back and uncomment it, and hopefully then see the test pass. I guess I should fire up my test server while I'm waiting, or while I'm working, so that we don't have to wait for it. Okay, so here's my spec, and I've got a number of tests in here. I'm going to make a new one. It matches the width of the viewport of the parent even when the city name is long. Okay, so I always write this. This is clearly going to have to be a, if you're an Angular developer, which I assume you are if you're still with me, I think anyone would have to write this as a component test that actually renders the template and tests the CSS of that template. I personally write almost all of my tests as component tests that actually render. In a small app like this, I render the whole app for every test. That's a different philosophy than most people will advocate for. But I suppose since this is the same way that anyone would write this test in terms of having a component test that actually renders, I don't have to justify it this time. Maybe in a future video. Excuse me. Okay, so I have to give you a little bit of an introduction to my testing setup. Like I said, all of my tests render the entire app, and they do that with this thing called a component context. And this is a component context. This superclass here comes from a library that I created, and it's available. You can use it too. Let me go ahead and find the link for you in case you want to. is going to be in my library called slibs. And it will be in ngdev. So I have a whole bunch of open source libraries. Like RxJS core is a bunch of utilities for if you're using RxJS. ngCore is utilities if you're using Angular, which then would depend on RxJS because Angular uses RxJS, so it might have some of that too. ngdev is sort of where all of my development utilities go, including these sorts of context things. And so if we look at component context here, this real simple one is you just set the component type to be, in our case, it's going to be app component or something similar. And then inside this run method, you'll have one on the screen all set up for you, ready for you to interact with. And you can pass it inputs, of course. So that's right, I was doing all of this to give you the URL. So it's GitHub, and the account is Simonton Software. That's my little LLC, my little company for my little side gigs, which these days just means open source stuff. I was doing some contracting before my current full-time position, which I've been at for 6 years and enjoy. And then slibs is the name of the actual package. So we have a weather graph context, which if we find the component type is this test component, which is a wrapper. And in this wrapper, I give it a fixed width. And then it renders my app root inside there. So when I use this weather graph context, I'm going to get my full app root inside of a 400 by 600 div on the screen. So I should have that all available here and ready to go. And let's just set a breakpoint there. Let this run. And then dig around in the CSS and see how we want to go from there. It's been a while since I've done any tests in this particular project, so I'm going to be sort of exploring and relearning how I set things up with you to figure out how to test the width of this thing. So let's pull up those tests, which should be this guy. And there's our test that failed. And it used to be, until I upgraded Angular, that you could click here and it would run just that one test for you. Something in, I don't know, the HTML reporter for Jasmine, I think, probably broke these links. So if I click this, it's going to go back to the non-debug URL and run all the tests every time I save the code, which is not what I want. I like to run my tests when I come to this page and press refresh. That's probably a consequence of the fact that I always render the full app and therefore my tests are slower. A unit test would be blazingly fast and you'd have to write a whole bunch of them. I do slower tests but fewer of them. But in the end, the whole experience is, I think, probably takes longer than someone who liked to do a lot of unit tests. So that's one of the trade-offs that I just deal with and choose to. We're still in queue. Okay. So here we are with our thing set up, and let's get this thing with a long name there so we can start to play with a broken version where this is too wide. So that is going to be right. So I need to flush network requests. When we open, so this is like opening the app for the first time, or yeah. When you click run, or when you get inside this run callback, and it's going to have some tests pending, and let me find some requests pending. Let me find one that flushes them. Well, here, we can go look at what this clean up fresh init does. Yeah, it looks like I probably just want that. Let's pull up a test from um, something that we know is going to be returning this city name. So here I have my sources. These make all the network requests. These make the network requests for the actual weather, but we get the city name from this location IQ third-party service. It's got an endpoint that we call to look up these city names. And if we look at this harness, um, I recently, within the last year or so, got into the Angular team, the CDK. The Angular material team released that also publishes the CDK, the component development kit, maybe. Anyway, if you're familiar with Angular material, perhaps you know of the CDK. They released component harnesses in Angular 9, I want to say, and now in Angular 11, they've fully fleshed out their component harness library for each one of the material components. And I looked into it and I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. For someone who writes a lot of um, full user click driven tests like me, I like to have my test basically pretend to be a user. It doesn't call any functions, it clicks. And it stubs network requests when possible. Those are the only places that I interact with it. And I let all the code run unhindered in between without stubbing and all that kind of stuff. Ideally, sometimes stubbing is necessary. Um, and so those harnesses for components, love it, perfect, great. I follow that, and I something clicked when I learned that and started trying that out. That's how I should structure all of my test helpers. So right now I have them in this particular project. I have them all called harnesses. Not sure if I love that naming convention, but anyway, any test helper that uses knowledge of what the service itself does, the implementation details of the service, in this case, the format of the network request and how to stub it and return the correct response payloads. All that code goes into the harness file next to that service in this case. So you have what I in this project call a service harness, and it has a builder which knows how to create a location response, and that's exactly what we want. We're going to want to construct an address where we can set the city name to something very long. So let's see where we've used this build location response before and use that as a template for how to set up our own. Here we go. Build location response. Somewhere we have to be testing the city name being displayed correctly. No, I didn't write tests for this project from the start. Some advice I can give you if you like doing side projects, which I do, obviously. Really embrace the idea of the MVP, the minimum viable product. Make the smallest, simplest thing that you will use, or if it's something that you personally want for your own use, or if have someone you know is going to use it, and write the minimum possible thing that will get them using it. And for me, I don't do tests at the beginning. I wait because if it takes too much work to get an app usable, a side project, it's too easy to abandon it and have it never come to fruition. And I used to have a lot of projects like that, but since I really embraced that attitude, that philosophy, I actually get something usable fairly quickly and start using it. And And then, over time I think, oh, I wish this thing that I use would do have some new feature or fix some bug because it's actually bothering me. Um, and then when I'm in that phase of adding things and getting it to be more complex, I start to get a test framework going for that project. And so it looks like probably I got the city name displayed um, before I was in the stage of writing tests for things. Now this app has gotten fairly complex. Um, Too complex. It's not terribly complex, but too complex to be able to confidently go in there and change anything to do with the chain of observables that link. When for example, if I um, flip this switch and I want to get my weather from a different source, if I do this real quickly, ooh, let's take that out of device mode. If I click down here real quickly and then click them off, it's all hooked up nicely to automatically cancel network requests because I wanted to learn how to do that. Um, and so there's this huge chain of observables that I've slowly learned how to manage and make readable and maintainable. But in that process, it was very easy to break things. And so I needed these tests. Okay. So we are still looking for, aha, here we set a city name. I had noticed, I just spied that. App get title. Hey, look at this. Location service triggers a title change. I would normally have a test here in the app component because, let me trim this down a bit. When I'm in full test writing mode, like at work, or now that I've got my app to a more mature state, anytime I write a line of code, I make sure a test covers it. And I count the HTML. So that's a line of code right here. And so normally I would have a test over here to say it displays the title, it displays the city name, whatever. But anyway, it looks like we can maybe copy paste this test. It's going to get a city name for us. City starting point. Yes, let's make this our long city name. That must be some kind of character with an accent on it or something. We'll see if that works. Okay, expect app title to be there. Okay, so if we just go this far, expect reverse. Let's just see if that's enough. Aha! It sure enough is. Okay, finally got to a point where we can write a failing test, because the test is going to say that the width of this title bar, or maybe the whole app component, is matching the width of the parent. And obviously here we see it is wider than the parent, and so that should fail. And so we need to get a hold of a div like, I guess this one, so that we can test its width assert its width in the test itself. So, in order to get a hold of essentially a DOM element through harnesses, it's wrapped in a something. What's that called? Get title. Locator for H1. Yeah, what does this guy return? This is a test element. So we're going to probably want to get a hold of the test element and assert its width. Or do we want to have a helper here that just gets the width? Interesting philosophy of a component harness to think about there. I think the right call here, one of the philosophies is that you should never expose, a harness should never expose like well, in this case, a DOM element that the outside user of that component doesn't already know about. So like if you um, if you project in something, maybe it could return that for you. Yeah, I'm not even sure if that would be a case. I'm not sure when a harness should ever actually return one of those test element objects. Oh, it would be for the in this case the app-root element itself. You would be okay returning that because the user, the outside user, knows for sure that that is a real thing because the outside user put that in his HTML or her. And so, you're not exposing any private implementation details in order to by returning that from a harness. But you don't want to return one of these inner things. So we wrote this H1 in our template, and we're going to consider that our private API, and the outside world shouldn't know or care that there's an H1 or anything like that. So we are going to make a get width. Or get, do we want to do get width or do we want to do get title toolbar width or something? Get header width. Maybe we'll call that the header. The outside world shouldn't care that it's a mat toolbar or anything else like that, but the concept of a header, that seems safe enough. So let's do an async get header width, which is going to return a promise type number, and it's going to look a lot like this, but instead of the H1, we want to return the mat toolbar. And the mat toolbar there should be a nice angular material harness for. So let's see if we can, let's play with that. Let's see if that's going to be a good way to go. I think we could probably do this, mat toolbar, and then return, how do we get the width? Maybe the CSS value? Or property. Let's try CSS value width. And this is a string. Because that could be probably any, it could be a string that ends in px or ends in em or ends in any of those length, the ways you can specify length in CSS. It'd be nice to get this in pixels to be able to return it as a number. And that way we hide the implementation, the private details of are we specifying this as a percentage or as anything else. I tell you what, let's do it as a string for now and just see what it looks like and play with it from there. So let's just log this guy. This will be the let's get a hold of the harness. So we're going to do ctx dot get harness. This is the app component harness. So that's how you get a hold of an instance of one of these guys in your test. And I'm going to call that the app. Then I'm going to log app.get header width. Now, if you're actually familiar with component harnesses, you'll think, hey, you forgot to await that. This returns a promise. If you're familiar with that, keep listening. If you're not, tune out for a minute. All of my tests I write in the fake async zone. In general, Angular tests, the community, I think, more commonly uses whichever zone sort of best fits their purpose at the time. I think, given the fact that component harnesses are all promise based, I think probably the norm is not to use fake async unless you have to, unless you specifically want that test to be able to control the passage of time. Essentially, that's what the fake async zone does for you. The way I use it. I made a decision a long time ago, way before harnesses existed, that I would just write all of my tests in the fake async zone, and then I'm not going to deal with deciding which one to use. And I'm going to, as I build up, test helpers, they can all just be written with that in mind. And I like it. I'm used to it. I'm sticking with it. But I liked harnesses so much, and that you can't use them in the fake async zone because you can't await when you're in the fake async zone. The test itself, you can't put an await right here. That just doesn't work. So after lamenting that I couldn't use component harnesses for long enough, I dug in and I made what I if I can feel this way about good about myself like this, made a really slick wrapper around this harness framework to be able to call it, pair it up with one of my context objects, and to be able to call it synchronously. And so this is a proxy with a synchronous version of what behind the scenes calls the async get header width. Causes change detection to run and promises to resolve, grabs the actual value from that resolved promise and returns it all behind the scenes. Okay, so that's enough self-congratulation. I'll explain why I just hit that reset later if it comes up again. Let's run the test again and see what this width value looks like. Yes, it's a string that ends in px. And I don't think I want to try to figure out how to convert from one of those CSS strings into the actual number of pixels, in any kind of generic way. So I think I'll just leave it as string for now, and that'll be good enough for my purposes. So we're going to expect this thing to be, and what should we actually expect it to be? 400 pixels. It looks like, yeah, this is 400. The div itself, if you look in this tooltip over here, is 402. So that's 400 for the inside plus 1 pixel on either side for that border. And so I'd expect my my title bar to be exactly 400 pixels across. So this is my failing test, and when I go uncomment my CSS, if all goes well, I will hit that sort of a little later than a TDD person, but hit that red-green refactor. So here's red. Let's see if we can turn it green. So I want to go back to my CSS. Get this activated again, save that. That should be rebuilding, and green. All right. Beautiful. And I don't need to refactor. I added one line in exactly the place I want it to be. I think we call that done. No, there may be some refactoring. Sorry. Celebrated a little early because I wanted to check out whether it would be a little cooler to use the Angular material prepackaged harness for these toolbars. So here's one version of get header width, and let's just compare that to see which one we're going to end up liking better. So this dot get there is a special subclass to get sub harnesses. What's that called? Something with content is in the name, I think. Content. Ah. Content container component harness. So this is a harness that actually has things in it. This component has things in it that you might want to get a sub harness for. Okay, and let me see. I don't really remember what is available in this API. Get harness. This allows us to get a sub harness called Mat Toolbar Harness. Equals await that thing. And then let's see what we can do with that. Toolbar dot. What do we have? What do we have? Get child loader. Get all harnesses. Looks like the only one out of this that we really want is this host, which is going to get us to that test element. So we would await that and then call our CSS value. So this is a more roundabout way to get ourselves to this same test element that we had here. Or I guess here. And let's just confirm that that works. Yeah, still green. So which one do we like better? Well, pros and cons. The pro of this one is that it's sort of more direct. We go straight to the we get the loader directly for that that test element. Because host, that word host means this actual element that you put in your template that then the Mat toolbar uses as its sort of like parent, is its div within the app. So we know what the host is, right? This was, like I said, this is the one test element that harnesses should feel okay exposing, is the host. Because that's the only element, it's the only DOM element that the outside user should know about. All the elements inside are the component's business, and the outside user shouldn't know or care. And so this gives us the host through what we know we put in our template. This gives us the host through what the component knows. It knows what its own host is. And which one's better, right? This is a little more direct. We don't have to go into the component and then get its host. But on the other hand, if, this is never going to happen, but theoretically, if Mat Toolbar changed the selector, or let's say, I don't know if this might even be possible. Maybe you can do like, maybe you can do it like this. They have multiple different selectors. Mat tool, yeah, looks like not, but Mat dialog title looks like you can make an element where Mat dialog title is like the browser, the name of the browser tag, or you could put that as an attribute on like a div. And so the advantage of going through this harness is the test helper now no longer cares which selector you used, whether you used a element selector or an attribute selector. This will get it either way. So I think I like that. Beautiful. And let me put this back. Refresh. We should still be green because this should be the code that I just ran. Perfect. Now I think we're done. Now I think we're done. Let's give that, make that a commit. So what do? We fixed. Now in my open source libraries, I use conventional commit messages. Um, in my actual applications, I'm not releasing a changelog that anyone cares about, so I just put whatever sort of feels descriptive enough for my own personal use. If I was on a team, of course, there might be team standards. Fix a long city name would make the app scroll horizontally, and it no longer does. Take a look over my diff. Always look at your diff before you commit. That's my rule for myself, at least, and I recommend to my team. I think that's beautiful. Commit and push, and now let's just for fun weather.simonton.app. This is open source and it's on the web. If you want to use my weather app, you can do so right here at this simple URL. I'll give you a quick tour in case you care. So you can choose your current location based off of the GPS coordinates of your device, or you can type one in. I've got 4 different sources for the actual weather information. I don't do any forecasting. I just render information from these 4 sources in a graph that I like to use. You can choose your units, and let me turn this down. I like to display just a few conditions, so the temperature and the precipitation from all the sources, so I can see, the variation. Like they agree usually pretty well on the temperature. The cloud cover, you can see they're way different than each other in what they're predicting. But for the sake of demonstrating here, we got the feels like temperature. Different forecasters use different words for that. It's all proprietary, how they calculate this. The dew point, and the wind. So if you like to use some subset of those for your weather, and you like the idea of seeing it in a graph like this, where you can explore, zoom in and out, you can see the 1-day view, the 3-day view, or the 1-week view. This is how I like to get my weather. I made this app because there's a graph a lot like this in the Android app that I used to use, but there were enough times, just enough times really, that their back end was down and I'd pull up my weather app and I wouldn't get the weather, that I decided I needed to find another app. I tried a whole bunch of them. None of the other ones that I found had a graph just the way I liked it from that original app, so I made my own. Anyway, that was a long commercial. What was I doing? Yes. So right now, this is in production. This was all, developing on localhost. Now this is in, quote unquote production for my little weather app that, 10 people in the world use until everyone watches this video and sees how awesome it is. So if we activate our bug in production, I want to see it broken and then fixed after I deploy. Oh yes, and weather.gov only works in the United States, so let's open up a different one. There's the weather in Wales right now, in case you're interested. And there we go. If we get a narrow window, we activate our bug where those icons are gone. Here, I'll make it even more narrow so it's real obvious. And we should be good to deploy, but I suppose it would be smart to run the full test suite and make sure we didn't break anything. This takes, I think, about 20 seconds for the number. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. That must have been a different app. This takes about 6 seconds. Great. Everything is green. Fantastic. We're broken in production. let's do a deploy, which I just have a little script for. I like to use Firebase, Google Firebase, for my apps. Um, Not that I've done an exhaustive search and I can really recommend them above anyone else. That's just what I use. And I do find they have a nice balance of being low cost, free tier for anything hobby. I never pay for any of my little hobby apps. But instead of running directly on Google Cloud Platform, I like to go through Firebase, which seems to be like you get a subset of the features of the full Google Cloud infrastructure, but it's all developed with a nice, developer experience in mind. It ties things together nicely. You can control it all through a point and click console. If you're just getting started, and then of course, eventually you want to have all your configuration be in your source code. So, if you want to clone it to a new project and tweak it, you don't have to go remember all the things you pointed and clicked at to set it up. It's all just in there. But anyway, our deploy is complete. So hopefully if we refresh this guy, oh yes, now this is a progressive web app. This is a gotcha. There, you'll see now it's finally loading the new HTML that has and JavaScript. So now next time I refresh, it should be fixed. Bam! Lovely. Progressive web apps are great. This is how I make any app um, that I care about any kind of offline experience with. Or if I just want on my phone to have a nice launcher on my home screen instead of having to go into Chrome and have a bookmark from there. They're great, but they have this caveat that one of the purposes of a progressive web app is to have the code, the JavaScript and HTML on the device so there's no network request needed. It can render with no network lag. And if you have an app like my Sudoku app, for example, Sudoku. No, actually, don't try that yet. There's no way to make a new game. Um, but if it doesn't even need a network request, that's good to go. It works full offline mode. You don't go to Chrome. It just looks and feels like a native phone app. Um, Even here on my Windows, I've got weather graph. It doesn't even, well, you can tell it's inside Chrome because of all this stuff up here, but it's a little bit nicer window decoration experience. It's its own separate app. And the caveat is when you click refresh, you're still going to have the old code because it's all saved on your disk and it rendered right away. But then behind the scenes, and Angular has a nice schematic. You can do ng add at Angular slash, it's not PWA. No, it is slash PWA, and it'll set it all up for you. After that delay that you saw, it'll go check to see if the code is updated, and if so, if the hash has changed or the timestamp or something, it will download it all so that the next time you refresh, it comes with the new code. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope some people out there found something useful or interesting. Let me know. This is the first video I've made like this, and if people like it, I can do more.